Elena Vasquez knelt among the crystalline flowers, her weathered hands carefully adjusting the nutrient feeds that kept the emperor's garden alive. The morning light of Kepler, 442b's twin suns filtered through the biodome's transparent aluminum walls, casting rainbow patterns across plants that had never known Earth soil. At 73, her joints protested every movement, but she had learned long ago that complaining was a luxury slaves couldn't afford. The garden was her prison and her sanctuary. 30 years ago, when the Draknari Empire's conquest fleets had turned Earth cities to glass, she had been Dr. Elena Vasquez, chief botanist aboard the UES Prometheus, humanity's first interstellar colony ship. Now she was simply Caretaker 7 Alpha, tending to alien flora in the heart of the palace that served as the Empire's beating heart. She moved between the rows of bioluminescent orchids, their petals shifting from deep purple to silver as her presence triggered their defensive displays. The Draknari had engineered these flowers to be beautiful and deadly, much like everything else in their empire. Touch them wrong, and paralytic toxins would drop a human in seconds. But Elena had learned their patterns, understood their needs. Plants were honest in ways that people often weren't. Magnificent specimens, aren't they? The voice came from behind her, smooth as silk and carrying the subtle hiss that marked all Draknari speech. Elena didn't flinch. 30 years of servitude had taught her to expect the unexpected. She turned slowly, keeping her eyes lowered as protocol demanded. Standing at the garden's entrance was High Counselor Vexthar, his emerald scales catching the light as he approached. 7 feet of predatory grace wrapped in ceremonial robes. He was one of the Emperor's most trusted advisors. Yes, honored one, Elena replied in careful Draknari, the language feeling strange on her human tongue even after all these years. The morning light brings out their true colors. Vexthar stepped closer, his clawed feet clicking against the polished stone path. You speak our language well, for a human. Most of your kind struggle with the subtleties. I have had much time to practice, honored one. Indeed you have. His golden eyes studied her with an intensity that made Elena's skin crawl. 30 years in service to the throne. That makes you quite the rarity. Most humans don't last half that long. Elena said nothing. She had survived by being unremarkable, by fading into the background like the maintenance systems that kept the palace running. Speaking now would only draw unwanted attention. Vexthar circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Tell me, Caretaker, what do you know of loyalty? The question was a trap. Elena could feel it in her bones. I serve the Empire faithfully, honored one. That isn't what I asked. His voice carried an edge now, sharp as a blade. Loyalty is more than mere service. It's devotion that transcends self-interest. It's choosing the good of the Empire over your own desires, your own memories. Elena's hands tightened around the nutrient dispenser she held. I understand, honored one. Do you? Vexthar stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to look up at his reptilian features. There are whispers in the outer colony's Caretaker. Whispers of human resistance cells, of rebels who dare to dream of freedom. Some say these rebels have sympathizers even here in the heart of the Empire. The accusation hung in the air between them like poison gas. Elena kept her expression carefully neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I know nothing of such things, honored one. My world is this garden. Your world, Vexthar repeated softly. How small it has become. Once, humans reached for the stars. Now you tend flowers in a cage. He paused, studying her reaction. Don't you miss it? The sky of your birth world? The freedom to walk where you choose. This was definitely a trap. Elena had seen too many humans disappear after conversations like this one. The Draknari were masters of psychological manipulation, experts at finding the cracks in their slaves' mental armor. Earth is dead, honored one, she said quietly. The past cannot be changed. I find meaning in what is not what was. Something flickered across Vexthar's features. Surprise, perhaps, or disappointment. Pragmatic. I suppose that's how you survived so long. He turned away, his robes swirling around his scaled legs. Continue your work, Caretaker. The Emperor takes great pleasure in his garden. As his footsteps faded, Elena allowed herself a single shaky breath. She had passed another test, bought herself another day. But the questions lingered in her mind like thorns. Why had Vexta really come here? What did he suspect? She returned to her work, forcing her hands to remain steady as she tended to a cluster of memory moss, living plants that could store and replay holographic images. The Draknari used them for decoration, but Elena had discovered they could hold much more than pretty pictures. Hidden among the roots of the largest specimen was a data crystal smaller than her fingernail, containing star charts and intelligence reports from the human underground. The resistance was real, though she could never admit it to Vexthar. Hidden in maintenance shafts and forgotten storage compartments throughout the palace, a network of human servants passed information to rebel cells in the outer systems. They were the Emperor's invisible army, cleaners, technicians, gardeners, people so beneath notice that they moved through the palace like ghosts. Elena's role was crucial, but dangerous. Her access to the palace's biosystems gave her unique opportunities to gather intelligence, but it also made her conspicuous. Every day, she walked the knife's edge between service and sabotage, survival and sacrifice. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the rebellion's latest intelligence reports. Something big was happening in the outer colonies. Ships had been disappearing along the Vega trade routes, and entire Draknari garrisons had gone silent. The official explanation blamed pirates or equipment failures, but the resistance knew better. Someone was fighting back with devastating effectiveness. The rebels called their mysterious ally the Dragon's Bane, a figure who struck from the darkness, leaving nothing but debris and legends in their wake. Some said it was a surviving human fleet. Others claimed it was an alien species seeking revenge against the Empire. Elena preferred facts to fantasies, but she couldn't deny that something was changing in the galaxy's balance of power. A soft chime from her communication device interrupted her thoughts. The sound meant one thing. The Emperor would be visiting the garden today. Elena's blood turned to ice. In 30 years of service, she had seen Emperor Zithkar exactly twice, both times from a distance during formal ceremonies. He was a figure of legend and nightmare, the Dragon Lord who had personally overseen Earth destruction. To be in the same room as him felt like standing beside a nuclear reactor. You couldn't see the radiation, but you knew it was killing you. She quickly checked the garden's status displays, ensuring every system was operating at peak efficiency. The flowers needed to be perfect, the lighting optimal, the air circulation precisely calibrated. Any flaw would reflect on her competence, and incompetent slaves didn't live long in the Imperial Palace. 20 minutes later, the garden's main entrance hissed open. Elena dropped to her knees immediately, pressing her forehead to the cold stone as protocol demanded. She heard footsteps, heavy, measured, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Rise," came a voice like distant thunder. Elena obeyed but kept her eyes fixed on the ground. Even looking directly at the Emperor without permission was considered an act of defiance worthy of death. "Your garden thrives," Emperor Zithkar said, his words carrying a strange undertone she couldn't identify. "The morning glory vines have exceeded their projected growth by 12%. The crystal orchids show no signs of the blight that affected the southern gardens. You have done well." "I live to serve the Empire, Your Magnificence," Elena replied, the formal response feeling like ash in her mouth. "Do you?" The question came with footsteps, and suddenly the Emperor was standing directly in front of her. She could see his shadow falling across the ground, massive and imposing. "Tell me, Caretaker, what do you see when you look at these flowers?" The question was unexpected. Elena risked a glance upward, meeting the Emperor's gaze for a split second before looking away. What she saw in that moment nearly stopped her heart. His eyes, brilliant gold with flecks of green, were achingly familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd seen them before. "I see life finding a way to flourish, Your Magnificence," she said carefully. "Each species adapts to its environment, develops strategies for survival." "Adaptation," the Emperor mused. "Yes, that is the key to survival, isn't it? The ability to change, to become what circumstances demand." His voice carried a weight of meaning that Elena couldn't decipher. "Sometimes we must become something entirely different from what we once were." Elena nodded, unsure how to respond to such philosophical observations from a being who commanded 17 star systems. "These flowers are not native to this world," the Emperor continued, moving away to examine a particularly large specimen. They come from dozens of different planets, each with unique environmental requirements. Yet here they grow together, creating something beautiful from diversity. He paused. Do you believe peace between different species is possible, Caretaker? The question was a minefield. Any answer could be interpreted as treasonous if she chose her words poorly. I believe life seeks balance, your magnificence. In nature, even predator and prey find ways to coexist. An interesting perspective. The Emperor's voice carried what might have been approval. You speak of balance, but the universe seems to favor conflict. The strong prey upon the weak. Empires rise and fall. Species war against each other for resources, territory, survival itself. Perhaps, your magnificence, Elena said slowly, but even in conflict, there can be understanding. A predator that wipes out all its prey soon starves. Sometimes mercy is simply enlightened self-interest. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. And what a forgiveness. Can there be forgiveness between enemies? Elena's heart raced. This conversation had veered into dangerous territory. Why was the Emperor, destroyer of Earth and enslaver of humanity, asking her about forgiveness? I believe forgiveness is possible, your magnificence. But it requires understanding and change and sometimes sacrifice. Sacrifice, the Emperor repeated. Yes, sacrifice is often required. He moved away from her, studying the memory moss with particular intensity. These plants can hold images for decades without degradation. Memories preserved in living tissue. Tell me, Caretaker, what would you preserve if you could choose any memory? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Against all wisdom, her mind flew to a specific moment. Holding her newborn son in the medical bay of the Prometheus, feeling his tiny fingers wrap around hers while Earth hung in the view screen behind them. Marcus, her beautiful boy, lost when the ship was attacked during the evacuation. I would preserve the memory of hope, your magnificence, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The Emperor turned toward her, and for a moment Elena thought she saw something impossible in his expression. Pain, longing, recognition. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Hope, he said quietly. Such a fragile thing. So easily crushed, yet it endures in the most unlikely places. He walked toward the exit, then paused. Continue your excellent work, Caretaker. The garden is precious to me. After he left, Elena remained kneeling for several minutes, her mind reeling from the strange encounter. Something about the Emperor's questions, his manner, even his voice, had seemed familiar in a way that defied explanation. She replayed their conversation in her mind, searching for clues to his unusual behavior. The memory moss beside her pulsed softly, its bioluminescent patterns shifting as it processed the day's events. Elena looked at it with sudden inspiration. Memory moss didn't just store deliberately recorded images. It could capture and replay any strong emotional resonance in its vicinity. If the Emperor's visit had affected her so strongly, perhaps the plant had recorded something useful. Glancing around to ensure she was alone, Elena placed her hand on the moss's central cluster and activated its recall function. The air above the plant shimmered, and suddenly, she was seeing the conversation from the moss's perspective. There was the Emperor, magnificent and terrifying in his ceremonial armor. But, as Elena watched the replay, she noticed something she had missed in person. When the Emperor spoke of forgiveness and sacrifice, his body language changed. His shoulders slumped slightly. His hands, normally held in positions of command, relaxed at his sides. For just a moment, he had looked less like a conqueror and more like someone carrying an impossible burden. But it was his eyes that truly caught Elena's attention. In the recording, she could see them clearly, the way they softened when he spoke of hope, the pain that flickered across his features when discussing memories. Those eyes were so familiar, yet she couldn't place them. A sound from the entrance made her quickly deactivate the moss's playback function. High Counselor Vex there had returned, and his expression was not pleased. Still working, I see, he said, his tone deceptively casual. The Emperor seemed quite taken with your garden. You spoke with him for nearly 10 minutes. His Magnificence asked questions about the plants, Honored One. I answered as best I could. I'm sure you did. Vexthar moved closer, his predatory grace making Elena's skin crawl. But I wonder, in all your years of service, have you ever noticed anything unusual about our Emperor? Anything that might suggest his thoughts turned toward weakness? Elena's mind raced. This was the real purpose of Vexthar's visits. He was investigating the Emperor himself. In the Byzantine politics of the Draknari Empire, even supreme rulers were not immune to challenges to their authority. I'm only a gardener, Honored One, Elena said carefully. I would not presume to understand the workings of minds far greater than my own. How modest! Vexthar's smile revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. But even gardeners can observe changes in their environment. Has the Emperor seemed different lately? More contemplative? Less decisive in matters of policy? Elena forced herself to appear thoughtful while her mind screamed warnings. Whatever game Vexthar was playing, it was dangerous for everyone involved. His Magnificence has always shown great wisdom in my presence, Honored One. If there have been changes, they are beyond my ability to perceive. Vexthar studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Of course. Well, continue your work, Caretaker. And remember, loyalty to the Empire means protecting it from all threats, even those that might come from unexpected sources. As he left, Elena sank onto a bench among the crystal orchids, her hands shaking. The political currents in the palace were shifting, and she was caught in the middle of something far larger than her simple role as gardener. The Emperor's strange questions, Vexthar's suspicious probing, the rumors of rebellion in the outer colonies, all of it was connected somehow, part of a vast web of intrigue that could easily destroy her. But, as frightening as the situation was, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Whatever was happening in the Empire, whatever changes were coming, she would find a way to help her people. The Resistance Network was counting on intelligence from inside the palace, and she wouldn't let them down. As the twin suns set over the capital city, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would begin taking greater risks. She would dig deeper into the palace's secrets, gather more intelligence for the rebellion. She had no way of knowing that the greatest secret of all was sleeping in the chambers directly above her head, or that the Emperor whose questions had puzzled her so greatly shared her blood, her DNA, and her determination to never give up, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. In the gathering darkness, surrounded by alien flowers that bloomed with borrowed light, the last free human on Kepler, 442b prepared for war. 3 days after her encounter with the Emperor, Elena found herself crawling through the palace's vast network of maintenance tunnels. The air recycling ducts were barely wide enough for a human body, and, at her age, every movement sent jolts of pain through her joints. But this was the only way to reach the weekly meeting of the resistance cell without being detected by the palace's extensive surveillance systems. The tunnel opened into a forgotten storage chamber deep in the palace's lower levels, where the rumble of the building's massive fusion reactors masked the sound of whispered conversations. Elena dropped through the access hatch, her feet finding purchase on a crate of obsolete equipment. Around her, shadows moved in the dim emergency lighting. 7 other humans, all that remained of what had once been a 20-person cell. About time, muttered Jacob Chun, a maintenance technician whose scarred hand spoke of decades spent keeping Draknari technology functioning. We were starting to think Vexthar had finally caught you. Elena shook her head as she settled onto an empty supply container. He's suspicious, but he has no proof. Besides, I think his real target is the Emperor, not us. That got everyone's attention. Maria Santos, who worked in the palace's communication center, leaned forward. What do you mean? Elena quickly recounted her conversations with both Vexthar and the Emperor, watching the faces of her fellow conspirators as she spoke. These people were the forgotten ones, cleaners, cooks, technicians, gardeners. To the Draknari, they were as invisible as the air circulation systems, which made them perfect spies. The High Counselor is definitely planning something, said David Kim, whose job managing the palace's waste disposal systems gave him access to some surprisingly sensitive information. I've been finding more encrypted data crystals in the refuse from his quarters. Someone's having a lot of secret meetings. Any idea what kind of meetings? Asked Elena. Military mostly. I managed to decode fragments before the crystals auto-destructed. Troop movements, fleet dispositions, something about Project Ascension. David's expression was grim. Whatever Vexthar is planning, it's big. Elena filed that information away for later analysis. What about the situation in the outer colonies? Any new intelligence? Maria's role in communications made her their primary source for news from beyond the capital world. The pattern of attacks is accelerating, she reported. 3 more Dragnari outposts went dark this week. The official explanation is still equipment failures, but I've intercepted emergency signals before they were cut off. These aren't accidents or pirates. Something is systematically dismantling Imperial infrastructure. The Dragon's Bane? Asked Thomas Rodriguez, the youngest member of their cell, at only 45. He worked in the palace's historical archives, a position that gave him access to strategic databases. Has to be, Maria confirmed. But here's the strange part. The attack patterns don't match any known human resistance tactics. They're too sophisticated, too coordinated. It's like whoever's behind this has inside knowledge of Imperial defenses. Elena frowned. You think we have a traitor in the high command? Or someone very close to it, Maria said. The timing is too perfect, the strike's too precise. Whoever's feeding intelligence to the Dragon's Bane knows exactly where to hit for maximum damage. The group fell silent, absorbing this information. The idea that they might have an ally in the highest levels of the Empire was almost too good to believe. But it also raised disturbing questions about their own security. There's something else, Thomas said quietly. Something I found in the historical archives that doesn't make sense. All eyes turned to him. Thomas rarely spoke during meetings unless he had something important to share. I was researching genetic modification records, trying to find information about human augmentation programs during the conquest. But I stumbled across something weird in the Imperial birth records. He pulled out a small data pad, its screen flickering with encoded information. 33 years ago, there was a genetic modification procedure performed on a Dragnari hatchling. The subject was designated as Project Genesis. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 33 years ago was right around the time of the conquest. Exactly. But here's the really strange part. The genetic material used in the modification wasn't Dragnari. The base DNA template was human. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's mind raced as she tried to process the implications. You're saying the Dragnari created a human-dragon hybrid? That's what the records suggest, Thomas confirmed. But it gets weirder. The human genetic material came from a specific source, someone designated as Subject Prometheus 7. He paused, studying Elena's face. You worked on the Prometheus, didn't you, Elena? Elena's blood turned to ice. I was the chief botanist, yes. But what does that have to do with? She stopped mid-sentence as a terrible possibility began to form her mind. Elena, Maria said softly, what was your designation number on the Prometheus? I was Officer 7 Alpha. The words came out as a whisper. Prometheus, 7 for short in the computer systems. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If the records were correct, if Project Genesis had used her genetic material, then somewhere in the palace was a creature that was part human, part dragon, and genetically her child. It can't be, she breathed. The Dragnari would never create hybrids. They consider other species inferior. Unless they had a specific purpose in mind, Jacob said grimly. Think about it. A human mind with dragon abilities. The perfect weapon against humanity. Someone who could understand human psychology while possessing superior strength and intellect. Elena's hands shook as she remembered the Emperor's strange questions, his familiar eyes, the way his voice had carried undertones of pain when he spoke about forgiveness and sacrifice. No, it's impossible, is it? Thomas's voice was gentle but insistent. When was the last time you saw Emperor Zithkar, before your recent encounter? Elena struggled to remember. During the conquest ceremonies, but that was decades ago. He was always at a distance, wearing full ceremonial armor. And you never wondered why the supreme ruler of the Empire would take such a personal interest in Earth destruction? Why he would oversee the conquest himself instead of delegating it to subordinates? The questions hit Elena like hammer blows. She had always assumed the Emperor's personal involvement in Earth's conquest was a matter of political theater, a way to demonstrate imperial power. But what if there had been a more personal motive? Elena, David said carefully, is there any chance you might have had a child during the evacuation? Someone who could have been captured when the Prometheus was attacked. The memory came flooding back with devastating clarity. Marcus, her beautiful baby boy, born during the chaos of Earth's evacuation. She had been holding him when the Draknari fighters caught their convoy, when the ship's hull was breached and emergency bulkheads slammed shut, separating her from the nursery section. She had searched the wreckage for days after their capture, begging their guards for information about survivors from the other sections. But the Draknari had told her all the children were dead, that she was lucky to be alive herself. She had grieved for her son for 30 years, carrying his memory like a wound that never healed. Marcus, she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. His name was Marcus Vasquez. The pieces clicked into place with horrible certainty. The Emperor's age, 33 years old according to imperial records. His unusual interest in the garden, the questions about forgiveness and hope. The way his eyes had seemed so familiar, so achingly like her own. Oh God, Elena gasped, doubling over as if she'd been punched. Oh God, what have they done to him? Maria moved to Elena's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. We don't know for certain, she said gently. This could all be coincidence. But Elena knew it wasn't. Deep in her heart, in that place where a mother's love never dies, she recognized the truth. Her son was alive. Her gentle, laughing baby had been transformed into the greatest monster in the galaxy, the Dragon Emperor who had enslaved humanity and ruled through fear and violence. The horror of it threatened to crush her. How many humans had died by his order? How many worlds had burned under his command? And all the while, he had been her child, her Marcus, stolen and twisted into something unrecognizable. What do we do with this information? Jacob asked quietly. Elena wiped tears from her cheeks, forcing herself to think past the emotional devastation. Nothing changes our mission, she said finally. We continue gathering intelligence for the resistance. Elena, Thomas said carefully, if the Emperor really is your son, that could be incredibly valuable information. The psychological impact alone, no. Elena's voice was sharp as a blade. We don't know how his transformation affected his mind, his memories. For all we know, he's completely loyal to the Draknari cause. Using this information could put him in danger from his own people. She saw the looks exchanged by her fellow conspirators and realized how her words sounded. But she couldn't help it. Regardless of what he had become, regardless of the terrible things he had done, some part of her still saw him as the baby she had held 33 years ago. Besides, she continued, if we're wrong about this, if we act on incorrect assumptions, we could expose the entire resistance network. We need to be absolutely certain before we make any moves. David nodded slowly. She's right. We need more evidence. But, Elena, you have to promise us something. What? Don't do anything stupid. Don't try to approach him directly or reveal what we suspect. If he really is a hybrid created by the Draknari, there's no telling what kind of psychological conditioning they subjected him to. He could be programmed to kill any human who poses a threat to Imperial security. Elena wanted to argue, but she knew they were right. The creature she had spoken with in the garden might share her DNA, but that didn't make him human. 30 years of Draknari influence could have shaped him into something completely alien to her understanding. The meeting broke up shortly after, each member departing through different routes to avoid suspicion. Elena found herself crawling back through the maintenance tunnels with her mind spinning like a centrifuge, trying to separate facts from hope from terror. When she finally reached her quarters, a small chamber barely large enough for a bed and storage locker, she activated her personal terminal and called up what few records she could access about the Emperor's reign. Most of the information was propaganda, but between the lines she began to see patterns that both horrified and intrigued her. Emperor Zithkar had indeed been unusually focused on human populations during the conquest. While other Draknari commanders had simply exterminated or enslaved their captives, the Emperor had established specific protocols for human preservation and study. It could be explained as scientific curiosity, but Elena wondered if there might have been deeper motives. More interesting was his behavior in the years since the conquest. While brutal in his suppression of rebellion, he had also instituted policies that seemed designed to minimize unnecessary human suffering. Work quotas that were harsh, but not impossible. Medical care for slaves to keep them productive. Educational programs that taught useful skills rather than pure indoctrination. Other Draknari lords often criticized these policies as wastefully soft, but the emperor's approach had proven remarkably effective at preventing large-scale uprisings. Elena had always assumed it was simply efficient tyranny, but now she wondered if there might be traces of human empathy buried beneath the dragon scales. As she prepared for sleep, Elena's thoughts turned to the strange questions the emperor had asked in the garden. His interest in forgiveness, in hope, in the possibility of peace between species. Were those the thoughts of a conqueror or of someone struggling with guilt over terrible actions? The next morning brought an unexpected summons. Elena was barely awake when a palace guard appeared at her door, informing her that she was to report to the Central Administration Complex immediately. Her blood ran cold as she imagined Vexthar's suspicious eyes, wondering if her activities had finally been discovered. But when she arrived at the designated location, she found herself standing before a different kind of official entirely. Commander Kethvar was the palace's head of security, a massive Draknari whose scarred hide spoke of decades spent in active military service. Unlike the politically minded Vexthar, Kethvar was known for his straightforward, soldier's approach to problems. "Caretaker 7 Alpha," he said without preamble. "You are being reassigned." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "May I ask to what position, Honored One?" "Personal botanical advisor to His Imperial Magnificence. You will be responsible for all plant life within the Emperor's private quarters and will report directly to him for your duties." Kethvar's golden eyes studied her carefully. "This is a position of great trust. I trust you understand the implications." Elena nodded mutely. A position that close to the Emperor could be incredibly valuable for intelligence gathering, but it would also place her under constant scrutiny. Any mistake, any suspicious behavior would be immediately apparent. "You will begin your duties immediately," Kethvar continued. "A full security briefing will be provided en route to the Imperial levels." As Elena followed the commander through the palace's gleaming corridors, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. Was this reassignment connected to her conversation with the Emperor? Had he specifically requested her services, or was it merely a coincidence? Either way, she was about to get much closer to the greatest mystery in the galaxy. If Emperor Zithkar really was her transformed son, she would soon have the opportunity to learn the truth. The only question was whether that truth would save them both or destroy everything she had spent 30 years working toward. The Emperor's private quarters occupied the entire top level of the palace's central spire, a vast complex of rooms that Elena had never imagined she would see. As Commander Kethvar led her through security checkpoints and biometric scanners, she marveled at the opulence surrounding her. The walls were lined with living crystal that pulsed with soft light, and the floors were made from polished stone that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its depths. But it was the gardens that truly took her breath away. Unlike the formal displays in the public areas, the Emperor's private botanical spaces were wild and organic, filled with plants from hundreds of different worlds. Terrestrial roses grew beside Andromedan singing trees, while pools of liquid mercury nurtured crystalline fungi that chimed softly in harmonic frequencies. The air itself was alive with floating spores that created shifting patterns of color and light. "Impressive, isn't it?" Kethvar said, noting her amazement. His magnificence has spent decades collecting specimens from every corner of the empire. Each plant tells a story of conquest and expansion. Elena nodded, but privately she wondered if the collection told a different story, one of longing for diversity, for the kind of natural beauty that could only exist when different species found ways to coexist. These weren't the gardens of a typical conqueror. Your predecessor maintained these spaces for 12 years before his health failed. Kethvar continued, leading her toward what appeared to be a central command center surrounded by monitoring equipment. The Emperor was quite specific that his replacement must understand both botanical science and artistic composition. Your reputation for creating harmony between incompatible species made you the obvious choice. Elena felt a chill at the phrase, incompatible species, wondering if there was hidden meaning in those words. I am honored by His Magnificence's confidence. See that you justify it, Kethvar warned. You will have access to areas of the palace that most Draknari nobles never see. You will observe the Emperor during his private moments, hear conversations that could topple governments. The security implications are enormous. He paused, fixing her with a stare that seemed to penetrate to her soul. One suspicious action, one sign that you might be a security risk, and you will disappear. Permanently. Do I make myself clear? Completely clear, Honored One. Good. Kethvar activated a control panel, and holographic displays showed detailed layouts of the Imperial quarters. You will work primarily in the private garden spaces, but your duties may occasionally extend to other areas. The Emperor sometimes requests planned arrangements for his study, his meditation chamber, even his sleeping quarters. Elena studied the layouts carefully, memorizing every detail. If she was going to help the resistance, she needed to understand the environment completely. Are there any plants that His Magnificence particularly favors? Interesting that you ask, Kethvar said. He seems especially drawn to Terran species. Roses, particularly the climbing varieties. Oak trees, though we've had to modify the soil composition extensively to support them. And recently, he's been cultivating a collection of earth herbs, basil, rosemary, sage. Elena's throat tightened. Those have been among her favorite herbs to grow in the hydroponic gardens aboard the Prometheus. She had often used them to season the simple meals she prepared for herself and Marcus during their long journey from Earth. I should mention, Kethvar continued, that His Magnificence prefers to work in the gardens personally rather than simply observing from a distance. You will likely spend considerable time in his direct presence. I trust this won't be a problem. Of course not, Honored One. But as Kethvar led her toward the main garden complex, Elena's hands trembled with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Every step brought her closer to the truth about the Emperor's identity, and to the possibility that her gentle son had become a monster. The central garden was a vast dome of transparent metal that offered a spectacular view of the capital city below. Inside, the space had been divided into different climate zones, each supporting plant life from a different region of the galaxy. But Elena's attention was immediately drawn to a small section near the center, where familiar blue-green foliage caught her eye. Terran plants. Dozens of them, arranged in careful patterns that seemed almost random until you looked closer. Then, Elena gasped, recognizing the layout from memory. It was an exact replica of the botanical garden she had maintained aboard the Prometheus. Magnificent, isn't it? The voice came from behind her, deep and resonant with the authority of absolute power. Elena spun around and dropped to her knees as Emperor Zithkar emerged from behind a cluster of towering ferns. Today he wore simpler clothes than the formal robe she had seen before, a dark green tunic and pants that allowed for ease of movement. But there was nothing simple about the creature himself. Even in casual dress, he radiated an aura of barely contained power that made Elena's primitive brain scream warnings about apex predators. Rise, the Emperor commanded, and Elena obeyed on unsteady legs. This close, she could see him clearly for the first time in 30 years. The scales that covered his skin were deep emerald with undertones of gold, and they moved with subtle shifts as he breathed. His face was angular and sharp, with the distinctive ridged brow that marked all Draknari nobility. But his eyes, those golden eyes with their flecks of green, those were achingly familiar. Commander Kethvar informs me that you are to be my new botanical advisor, the Emperor said, studying her with an intensity that made Elena feel like a specimen under a microscope. Yes, Your Magnificence. I am honored to serve in any capacity you deem appropriate. Indeed, the Emperor moved toward the Terran section, his clawed feet clicking softly against the polished floor. Tell me, what do you think of this particular arrangement? Elena followed carefully, her heart pounding as she recognized more details from her memories. The way the climbing roses were positioned to catch the morning light. The careful spacing between the herb gardens to allow for proper air circulation. Even the small stone pathway that wound between the plantings was exactly as she had designed it decades ago. It's very well planned, Your Magnificence. The person who created this understood both the aesthetic and scientific principles involved. Did they? The emperor knelt beside a small rosebush, running one clawed finger gently along its stem. I've often wondered about the original designer's intentions. These plants seem arranged not just for beauty, but for some deeper purpose, almost as if they were meant to tell a story. Elena's breath caught. This was no coincidence. Somehow, the emperor had recreated her exact garden design from the Prometheus. But how could he have known those details unless— "Your Magnificence," she said carefully, "may I ask where you obtained the information for this layout?" The emperor was quiet for a long moment, still focused on the rosebush. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been pain. "From memory," he said simply. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at the emperor's profile, searching for any trace of the child she had once known. The bone structure was different, altered by genetic modification and years of growth. But there was something in the way he held himself, the careful way he touched the plants. "Memory can be unreliable, Your Magnificence," Elena said, testing the waters. "Can it?" The emperor looked up at her, and for a moment his expression was unguarded. "Sometimes I have dreams, fragments of images that feel more real than waking life." A woman's voice singing lullabies. The taste of food prepared with these same herbs. The feeling of being safe and loved. His eyes hardened. "But such memories are impossible. I am Draknari. I was hatched from an egg in the imperial breeding chambers." Elena's heart broke at the confusion in his voice. Whatever process had transformed her human son into a Draknari emperor had been incomplete. Deep inside, Marcus was still fighting to remember who he had been. "Dreams can be powerful, Your Magnificence," she said softly. "Sometimes they show us truths that our conscious minds refuse to accept." The emperor rose, his movements sharp and sudden. "Truth? What truth could there be in impossible memories? I am what I am, the supreme ruler of the Draknari Empire, conqueror of 17 star systems, the hand of justice across the galaxy." But his words sounded hollow, like someone reciting lines from a script. Elena took a careful step closer. "And yet you maintain a garden filled with plants from a destroyed world. You recreate patterns that speak to some deep part of your mind. Perhaps those dreams are trying to tell you something important." The emperor's golden eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "You speak dangerously, Caretaker. There are those who would consider such words treasonous. I speak only of what I observe, Your Magnificence. Plants don't lie. They grow toward the light, regardless of what names we give them or what purposes we claim they serve." Elena gestured toward the Terran section. "These plants remember Earth, even though their home world is gone. Memory is encoded in their very DNA, as it is in all living things," the emperor murmured, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Show me how to care for them properly. I want them to thrive, not merely survive." For the next hour, Elena worked alongside the emperor in the garden, showing him proper pruning techniques for the roses and explaining the nutrient requirements of the various herbs. It was surreal, the destroyer of humanity kneeling in soil, carefully following her instructions on how to encourage new growth from Terran plants. But what struck Elena most was how natural he seemed in this role. His massive claws, designed for rending and tearing, handled the delicate stems with surprising gentleness. When he spoke to the plants, and he did speak to them, murmuring encouragement in Draknari, his voice carried none of the imperial authority she had heard in public. He sounded almost human. "Your Magnificence," Elena said during a brief pause, "may I ask why these particular plants are so important to you?" The emperor was silent for so long that Elena wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. But when he finally answered, his words were barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I only know that when I'm here, among these growing things, I feel peaceful, as if I'm remembering something I lost long ago." He looked up at her, and Elena saw naked vulnerability in his expression. "Do you ever feel as if you're living someone else's life? As if the person you're supposed to be is trapped somewhere deep inside, screaming to be free?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. This was her son, lost, confused, imprisoned in a body and life that weren't truly his. Every instinct screamed at her to embrace him, to tell him the truth, to try to awaken the human consciousness buried beneath layers of Draknari conditioning. But she remembered her fellow conspirators' warnings about psychological programming. If she moved too quickly, If she triggered some kind of mental defense mechanism, she could destroy any chance of reaching him. I think, she said carefully, that we all wear masks sometimes. The challenge is remembering who we truly are beneath them. The Emperor stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Wise words. I can see why your reputation for understanding complex relationships between different species is well-deserved. A soft chime from the Emperor's personal communicator interrupted the moment. His entire demeanor shifted as he read the message, the vulnerability disappearing behind the mask of imperial authority. High Counselor Vex Thar requests an immediate audience, he said, his voice once again carrying the weight of command. Our time here is ended for today. Elena bowed deeply. Of course, Your Magnificence. Shall I continue my work while you attend to matters of state? Yes. And Caretaker. The Emperor paused at the garden's entrance. What we discussed today, my dreams, my questions, such conversations are private. Do you understand? Completely, Your Magnificence. After he left, Elena remained in the garden, her mind reeling from the encounter. There was no doubt now. Emperor Zithkar was her son Marcus, transformed by Draknari genetic manipulation into something that was neither fully human nor fully dragon. But the process had been imperfect. Deep inside his modified mind, traces of his human consciousness survived, manifesting as dreams and unexplained emotional connections to Terran life. The question was what to do with this knowledge. The Resistance needed intelligence about imperial military operations, not philosophical discussions about gardening. And yet, Elena couldn't help feeling that this might be even more important. If Marcus could be reached, if his human side could be awakened, it could change everything. As she worked among the Terran plants, Elena noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Hidden beneath the largest rosebush was a small data storage device, its surface carefully camouflaged to look like an ordinary fertilizer capsule. Someone else had been using this garden for clandestine purposes. Elena glanced around quickly to ensure she was alone, then activated the device. What she saw on its tiny display made her blood run cold. Military deployment schedules, fleet movement orders, intelligence reports about resistance activities in the outer colonies, and, most damning of all, detailed plans for something called Operation Cleansing Fire, which appear to involve the systematic extermination of human populations across multiple star systems. But the most shocking revelation was the source of the intelligence. According to the device's metadata, these files have been placed here by Emperor Zithkar himself. Elena stared at the information in growing horror. Either her son was planning the greatest genocide in galactic history, or he was secretly working to prevent it. Given what she had just witnessed in the garden, she prayed it was the latter. But as footsteps echoed from the garden's entrance, Elena quickly deactivated the device and returned it to its hiding place. High Counselor Vex Thar had arrived for his meeting with the Emperor, and his expression suggested that storm clouds were gathering over the palace. Elena would have to wait to discover which side of the coming war her son was really on. But one thing was certain. The galaxy stood on the brink of either salvation or annihilation, and the key to everything lay in the memories of a dragon emperor who dreamed of being human. Elena barely slept that night. The hidden data device haunted her thoughts, its implications too enormous to process fully. As dawn broke over the capital city, she found herself back in the Emperor's garden earlier than required, unable to stay away from the mysteries it contained. The morning light filtering through the dome's transparent walls caught the dew on the Terran roses, making them sparkle like jewels. Elena moved among them mechanically, checking soil moisture and adjusting nutrient feeds, while her mind wrestled with impossible questions. If the Emperor was secretly feeding intelligence to the Resistance, why hadn't the rebellion's leadership mentioned having such a high-placed source? And if he was planning Operation Cleansing Fire, how could she reconcile that with the vulnerable person she had spoken with yesterday? You're early today. The voice startled her from her thoughts. Emperor Zithkar emerged from the shadows between two towering ferns, moving with the silent grace of a natural predator. I find the morning hours peaceful, Your Magnificence, Elena said, dropping into the required bow. The plant seemed to respond better to care when the energy levels are lower. Energy levels, the Emperor mused, approaching the rosebush where Elena had discovered the hidden device. An interesting way to describe it. I often find myself drawn here in the early hours as well. There's something about this place that quiets the noise in my mind. Elena watched him carefully as he knelt beside the roses, noting how his clawed fingers hovered protectively over the fertilizer capsules, including the one that contained military secrets. The gesture was almost unconscious, but it told her everything she needed to know. "Your Magnificence," she said carefully. "Yesterday you mentioned dreams that felt more real than waking life. Have you ever considered that they might not be dreams at all?" The Emperor's golden eyes snapped to her face with startling intensity. "What do you mean?" Elena took a breath, knowing she was about to cross a line from which there could be no return. Sometimes memories can be suppressed or altered, but they never truly disappear. They find ways to surface, especially in places or situations that feel familiar. "You speak as if you know something about my past that I do not." The Emperor's voice carried a dangerous edge, but Elena sensed curiosity beneath the threat. "I know that genetic modification can alter a body completely while leaving traces of the original consciousness intact," Elena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know that a person could be transformed into something entirely different and still retain fragments of who they once were." The Emperor rose slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the garden. "Such knowledge would require first-hand experience with genetic modification programs. Tell me, Caretaker, what exactly do you know about Project Genesis?" Elena felt the blood drain from her face. If the Emperor knew about Project Genesis, then he was aware of his own origins. The question was whether he saw himself as victim or willing participant. "I know," she said quietly, "that 33 years ago, a human child was taken from the wreckage of an Earth evacuation ship and subjected to experimental procedures that transformed him into something he was never meant to become." The Emperor's expression was unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "And what do you know of this child's original identity?" Elena closed her eyes, calling up the memory of her son's face. The green eyes, the way his tiny fingers had grasped hers, the soft sound of his breathing as he slept against her chest. His name was Marcus Vasquez. He was 3 months old when he was taken. His mother was a botanist aboard the Prometheus who spent 30 years believing he was dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena opened her eyes to find the Emperor staring at her with an expression of such raw pain that it took her breath away. "You're her," he said, his voice breaking. "You're the woman from my dreams. The one who sang lullabies and grew herbs in little pots and held me when the thunder scared me." Tears began to track down his scaled cheeks. "Mother," Elena's composure shattered. 30 years of grief, loss, and desperate hope came flooding out as she reached toward him. "Marcus? My baby boy." The Emperor, her son, fell to his knees in the dirt, his powerful frame shaking with sobs. Elena rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his massive shoulders and holding him as she had when he was small. He felt different, larger, harder, covered in scales instead of soft skin. But underneath it all, he was still her child. "I remember," he gasped against her shoulder. "I remember your voice, your face, the way you would hum while you worked in the garden. The stories you told me about Earth, about places where things grew wild and free." He pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes swimming with tears. "But I also remember the pain, the procedures, the voices telling me that my memories were lies, that I was Draknari, that humans were weak and deserved to be enslaved." Elena cupped his face in her hands, noting how the bone structure had been altered, but the eyes, those beautiful eyes, remained unchanged. "What they did to you was monstrous. But you survived, Marcus. You're still you, underneath everything they try to make you become." "Am I?" His voice was full of anguish. "Do you know what I've done in their name? How many humans have died because of my orders? How many worlds I've conquered? How many families I've destroyed?" He pulled away from her, his expression tortured. "I'm a monster, Mother. Whatever child you remember is long gone." "No." Elena's voice was firm. "A monster wouldn't maintain a secret garden filled with earth plants. A monster wouldn't feed intelligence to the human resistance. A monster wouldn't weep at the sight of his mother." Marcus, she couldn't think of him as the Emperor anymore. Not now. Looked up sharply. "You know about that? I found the data device yesterday. At first I thought." Elena shook her head. "But now I understand. You're the Dragon's Bane, aren't you? You're the one who's been sabotaging Imperial operations in the outer colonies. Marcus nodded slowly. For the past 5 years, ever since the dreams started becoming stronger, I began to remember fragments, faces, voices, emotions that made no sense given my supposed Draknari heritage. The more I remembered, the more I began to question everything I'd been taught. But the other attacks, Elena said, the systematic destruction of Imperial outposts. How are you managing that from here? I'm not the only hybrid they created, Marcus said grimly. Project Genesis produced dozens of modified beings, humans transformed into Draknari, Draknari enhanced with human creativity and adaptability. Most of them are completely loyal to the Empire, but a few have begun to remember their original identities. He paused. We call ourselves the Forgotten. We work in secret, using our positions within the Imperial hierarchy to feed information to the Resistance and sabotage military operations. Elena stared at him in amazement. You've been building a rebellion from within the Empire itself. Trying to, Marcus corrected, but it's not enough. High Counselor Vex Thar suspects that there's a leak in High Command. He's been pushing for more aggressive policies, more systematic elimination of human populations. Operation Cleansing Fire is his brainchild, a plan to solve what he calls the human problem permanently. Elena felt ice form in her veins. How long before he implements it? 3 days. The operation launches during the celebration of Empire Day. While the galaxy's attention is focused on the festivities, Draknari fleets will systematically sterilize every world with significant human populations. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Billions of people will die unless we can stop him. Can't you just countermand the order? You're the Emperor. Marcus laughed bitterly. In name only. Vexthar and his faction control the military directly. They tolerate me because I'm useful for ceremonial purposes, but they wouldn't hesitate to remove me if I became an obstacle to their plans. He paused. Actually, I think they're already planning to replace me. Vexthar has been asking questions about my mental state, my fitness to rule. He knows something is wrong. Elena processed this information quickly. Then we have to act fast. The Resistance needs to know about Operation Cleansing Fire so they can warn the colonies. I've already transmitted the intelligence through our network, Marcus said. But warning people isn't enough. The human fleets can't stand against the full might of the Imperial Navy. We need to stop the operation at its source. Ow! Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. The command codes for Operation Cleansing Fire are stored in the palace's central military computer. If we could corrupt or destroy those codes, the operation would fail. But the computer core is heavily guarded, and accessing it would require someone with the highest security clearance. Elena felt a chill of understanding. Someone like the Emperor? Yes, but I can't do it alone. The security protocols require biometric confirmation from multiple sources. I would need help from someone with administrative access to the palace systems. He looked at her intently. Someone like a personal botanical advisor who has been granted access to areas throughout the Imperial levels. Elena realized what he was asking. You want me to help you commit treason against the Empire that employs us both. I want you to help me save our people, Marcus corrected. And maybe if we're very lucky, find a way to end this war without destroying both our species in the process. Elena thought about the Resistance fighters risking their lives in the outer colonies, about the billions of humans who would die if Operation Cleansing Fire succeeded, about the Draknari soldiers who would carry out those orders without question. This was bigger than personal revenge or even species loyalty. This was about preventing a genocide that would stain the galaxy with blood for generations. What do you need me to do? She asked. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since their reunion. For a moment, he looked less like a dragon emperor and more like the son she remembered. First, we need to get a message to the Forgotten. They need to know that you're here, that you're my mother. Your presence changes everything. It proves that the genetic modification process can be overcome, that we can remember who we really are. And then we break into the most secure computer system in the galaxy and reprogram it to save both our species. Marcus stood, offering Elena his clawed hand. Are you ready to change the course of galactic history? Elena took his hand without hesitation. I've been ready for 30 years. As they walked together through the garden, mother and son, human and hybrid, Caretaker, and Emperor, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of the oppressed, but the fierce, determined hope of those who refuse to accept that evil must triumph. The war between humanity and the Draknari Empire was far from over. But for the first time since Earth's fall, Elena believed they might actually win. The next 2 days passed in a blur of careful planning and dangerous preparation. Marcus introduced Elena to other members of the Forgotten through coded communications and secret meetings in forgotten corners of the palace. She met a Draknari general who had once been a human marine, a political advisor who retained memories of his childhood in Earth's colonies, and a dozen others whose true identities have been stolen, but not completely erased. Each of them had a role to play in the plan to stop Operation Cleansing Fire. Some would create diversions to draw security away from the computer core. Others would ensure that the palace's surveillance systems experienced convenient malfunctions at critical moments. Elena's job was perhaps the most dangerous of all. She would have to physically access the computer core alongside Marcus, providing the secondary authorization needed to alter the military commands. As Empire Day dawned across the capital city, Elena found herself standing once again in the Emperor's garden, surrounded by Earth plants that had somehow survived in an alien world. In a few hours, she would either help save billions of lives or die in the attempt. But as she watched Marcus moving among the roses, speaking softly to them in the same voice she remembered from his childhood, Elena knew they would succeed. The Draknari Empire had made one critical error in their transformation of human children. They had underestimated the power of love to transcend any barrier, survive any trauma, and ultimately triumph over the forces of darkness. Today, they would learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their refusal to surrender hope, even when the universe itself seemed determined to extinguish it. Today, the dragons would discover what it truly meant to face humanity at its finest. Empire Day had arrived with all the pomp and spectacle that the Draknari loved. From her position in the Emperor's private garden, Elena could hear the distant roar of crowds gathered in the capital city's Grand Plaza, celebrating another year of imperial dominance. Aerial displays painted the sky with dragon formations while military parades showcased the Empire's overwhelming might. But beneath the festivities, a different kind of drama was unfolding. The security rotations have been confirmed, Marcus said quietly as he approached through the garden paths. To any observer, he appeared to be simply checking on his plants before the evening's formal ceremonies. At 1400 hours, there will be a 30-minute window when the computer core's guard detail changes shifts. Elena nodded, her hands steady as she tended to a cluster of earth orchids. The maintenance access will be clear. Commander Kethvar is handling that personally. He's one of us, transformed from a human military engineer captured during the siege of New Geneva. He'll ensure the surveillance systems experience technical difficulties at precisely the right moments. The knowledge that even the palace's head of security was part of the resistance still amazed Elena. The Draknari had unknowingly seeded their own government with enemies by creating so many hybrids. But it also highlighted how precarious their position was. If Vexthar discovered the extent of the infiltration, the purge would be swift and brutal. What about the other members of your council? Elena asked. Won't they notice your absence during the computer core operation? Marcus's scaled features hardened. Vexthar has called a special session for this afternoon. He's planning to present evidence of what he calls treasonous activities within the palace. I believe he intends to move against me today. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's climate controls. Then we're out of time. Yes, which is why we're moving the operation forward. We'll access the computer core during the council session. While Vexthar is distracted with his accusations, we'll be saving the galaxy. A soft chime from Marcus's personal communicator indicated an incoming priority message. His expression grew grim as he read it. What is it? Elena asked. Intelligence from our contacts in the outer colonies. 3 human worlds have gone silent in the past hour. Their communication networks completely dead. Vexthar hasn't waited for the official launch time. He's begun Operation Cleansing Fire early. Elena's blood turned to ice. Somewhere in the galaxy, billions of human beings were dying while she stood in a garden discussing plans. How long before all the worlds are hit? The operation was designed as a systematic sweep. If Vex-Thar is following the original timeline, but starting early, we have perhaps 6 hours before the main population centers are attacked. Marcus's claws extended unconsciously as his anger built. We have to stop this now. Elena looked around the garden, at the earth plants that had somehow found a way to thrive in alien soil, at the impossible beauty that could emerge when different species found ways to coexist. Then let's end this. The next hour passed in careful preparation. Elena changed into maintenance coveralls that would allow her to move through the palace's service areas without attracting attention. Marcus donned his formal ceremonial armor, the regalia expected of an emperor attending a crucial council session. To all appearances, they were preparing for their respective duties on this most important of imperial holidays. But hidden beneath Elena's coveralls was a portable data interface capable of rewriting military command codes. And Marcus's ceremonial armor concealed weapons that could clear a path to their objective if stealth failed. At precisely 1350 hours, Elena made her way through the palace's service tunnels toward the central computer core. The maintenance shafts were cramped and uncomfortable, but they provided access to areas that even most palace staff never saw. As she crawled through the narrow passages, Elena couldn't help remembering her escape routes during the early days of the Resistance Network. She had never imagined those skills would prove useful for saving the galaxy. The computer core occupied an entire level of the palace's foundation, protected by redundant security systems and quantum encryption barriers. Elena emerged from a maintenance access point to find herself in a vast chamber filled with humming processors and data storage matrices. The air itself seemed to vibrate with computational power, and standing guard over it all was Commander Cathvar. "Caretaker," he said with a slight nod. To anyone monitoring the security feeds, he appeared to be conducting a routine inspection. His magnificence requires certain botanical data to be updated in the environmental control systems. It was a carefully crafted cover story that would explain Elena's presence if questioned later. She approached the central terminal, her heart hammering as she realized she was about to touch the technological heart of the Draknari Empire. "The access codes?" she asked quietly. Cathvar provided a series of authorization keys that Elena input carefully. The terminal's holographic display flickered to life, showing the galaxy-spanning network of military communications that connected Imperial fleets across 17 star systems. And there, highlighted in crimson priority tags, were the commands for Operation Cleansing Fire. Elena stared at the data streams in horror. The operation was even more comprehensive than she had imagined. Not just human colony worlds, but any planet with significant human populations. Mining stations, agricultural settlements, even worlds where humans comprised less than 10% of the population. Vex-Thar's definition of solving the human problem was nothing short of complete extermination. "Can you stop it?" Cathvar asked urgently. Elena activated the portable interface and began working. The military command structure was incredibly complex, with multiple authorization layers and fail-safe systems. But her years of maintaining integrated biological and technological systems had taught her to think systematically about information flow. "I can disrupt the communication protocols," she said, her fingers flying over the interface controls. "If I introduce cascade errors into the command transmission systems, the fleet commanders won't receive coherent orders. But Marcus needs to provide Imperial authorization to make the changes permanent. He's on his way. The council session has been delayed. Vex-Thar is having trouble gathering support for his accusations." Elena continued working, inserting carefully crafted system errors into the command structure. Each change had to appear accidental, the result of system overloads during Empire days increased communication traffic rather than deliberate sabotage. If discovered too quickly, Vex-Thar could simply route the commands through backup systems. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Elena looked up hopefully, expecting to see Marcus, but instead found herself facing 3 Draknari guards in full combat armor. "Step away from the terminal," the lead guard commanded, his weapon trained on Elena. "You are under arrest for crimes against the Empire." Cathvar moved smoothly, his warrior's reflexes unchanged by genetic modification. His first strike dropped one guard before they could react. The second fell to a precision blow that severed the connection between brain and spinal cord. But The third guard managed to trigger an alarm before Kethvar could reach him. "How much more time do you need?" Kethvar asked as emergency lights began flashing throughout the chamber. 2 minutes to complete the cascade errors, Elena replied, forcing herself to focus on the work despite the chaos erupting around them. But without Marcus's authorization codes, the changes won't hold. More guards were approaching. Elena could hear their footsteps echoing through the corridors. Kethvar took position at the chamber's entrance, preparing to hold them off as long as possible. The first wave of reinforcements arrived with military precision, their energy weapons filling the air with deadly light. Kethvar fought with the skill of someone who had faced impossible odds many times before, but Elena knew he couldn't hold off an entire garrison indefinitely. Then, a new sound echoed through the chamber, the roar of a dragon in full fury. Emperor Zithkar burst into the computer core with devastating force, his ceremonial armor gleaming as he tore through the attacking guards like tissue paper. His claws were fully extended, his golden eyes blazing with primal rage as he protected his mother and his mission. "The authorization codes," Elena called out. "I need your biometric signature." Marcus fought his way to the central terminal, placing his clawed hand on the authorization scanner while continuing to fend off attackers with his free arm. The scanner's light played across his palm, reading genetic markers that identified him as the supreme ruler of the Draknari Empire. "Authorization confirmed," the computer announced in its emotionless voice. "Please specify desired command modifications." Elena finalized the cascade errors, introducing systematic